Hi, good morning all. Today we are going to learn about how do we create ASP.NET MVC Core 3.1 Web API and how do we consume that Web API using Angular 10 application. In this process, we are going to talk about how do we create the Web API using ASP.NET MVC Core 3.1 framework. How do we create the open API documentation for this API by using Swagger framework? And how do we test that API by using the Swagger framework generated UI, also known as Swagger UI. And then in the second part of the session, we are going to talk about how do we set up the Angular development environment to create the Angular application. How do we implement the backend communication service? How do we implement CRUD UI implementation overall? CRUD stands for Create, Retrieve, Update, Delete Operations, typical database-driven application we are going to create, how the real communication happens, and ultimately, how do we test the front-end application created using Angular 10. So let's begin. Let's see how do we create the web API using ASP.NET MVC Core 3.1. Before that, just a bit about what ASP.NET MVC Core Web API is. Web API is a framework from Microsoft on the top of ASP.NET framework that allows us to create the RESTful services pretty easily. So if I'm looking to create the RESTful services on .NET platform, Web API is the way to go forward. And .NET platform itself has got two flavors in terms of its implementation. The first is .NET Framework, and the second one is .NET Core. The major difference between these two frameworks is .NET Framework is Windows-only framework, whereas .NET Core is cross-platform and completely open source framework. Hence, when we talk about ASP.NET Framework, that also comes along with both the flavors of .NET Framework. So we have ASP.NET and we have ASP.NET Core with respect to the basic .NET frameworks that we have. And hence the web API also makes the way in both of the implementations. So the web API that we create on ASP.NET Core is what we call as ASP.NET MVC Core Web API. And 3.1 over here is representing the version of the .NET Core platform. So this is the version that we are going to target. Let's see how do we create this web API. And this web API is going to talk to the database SQL Server backend and provide me all the CRUD operations for this Angular 10 front-end application to consume. So let's switch on to Visual Studio. Here I'm going to use Visual Studio 2019 for creating this project, though you can use Visual Studio 2017 or 2015 as well, depending on which version you have. Here, I simply click on Create a New Project. And then using these filters boxes, I just set up the first drop down for the filter as C#, as that's the choice of language I'm going to use for coding into the server side implementation. I'm looking for a cross-platform implementation, so I select all platforms here. And here, then I select web, which allows me to see all the project templates to create the web applications. So the first template which comes up over here is ASP.NET Core Web Application. I'll select this and click on Next. I need to give the name for this project. So let's call this as DNC_demo Web API. And the location I'm going to choose as D drive demos. And let's click on Create. This being a web application, if you have worked with ASP.NET platform in the past, you must be aware of that. After creating the project, we actually need to select the template for that particular project, which sets up the initial environment for that application development. So we have some choices over here like empty, which will just create the empty web application with no sample stuff into it. Then we have web application, which creates a web application with some sample stuff based on ASP.NET pages, now which are created with Razor pages syntax. So typically, Razor pages based web application will be created. Then we have web application model view controller. So this is where once again the web application with MVC pattern implemented into it will be created with some sample stuff already into it. API also does something similar to web application. One major difference being here, it by default comes up with the sample web API based on ASP.NET Core Platform. And then we have some templates for Angular, React, and React.js and Redux. These are ready-made templates. Boilerplate code by default comes up with these, but the version of the frameworks, Angular or React, is somewhat older than what is the latest version in the market. So the reason behind that is because when Visual Studio gets released, at that point in time, whatever the latest version of these respective frameworks is available, Microsoft adopts that and integrates that. And after that, if there are any changes to the framework itself for Angular or React, the template remains the older one itself. So that is the reason why we are not going to use this template for Angular, as this is going to use Angular 8 and we are targeting Angular 10. So rather, I'm going to select this template named as API and I click on create. The project gets created pretty quickly, comes up with the welcome page over here about the project creation and what can be done next, and documentation links and all being represented over here. So I'll just close this welcome page and move to the Solution Explorer window. If it's not visible here on either left or right side, you can take it from the view menu. So you have view and Solution Explorer option here. Now let's see what it has generated for us. There is a model class by default being placed over here by the name weather forecast. And here is the model data that is going to be used by the sample web API, which has been already created for us by the name weather forecast. What it is having is date of datetime type representing the date of the weather forecast. Then temperature C that represents temperature in Celsius. Temperature F represents temperature in Fahrenheit, and which is based on the calculation on the top of temperature in Celsius. And then we have summary, which displays information about the weather based on what the temperature is. So it could be too cold, too hot, chill, or something like that. Then we have the controller named as weather forecast. And here we have the attribute API controller, which makes it the web API. And we have the attribute based routing used over here. That starts with route and then the route template that takes in the controller name as the parameter. And based on that, the calls will be made to this web API. Here we have some payload that is going to be used to generate randomly some value for the description or the summary part of your weather forecast model object based on the temperature. So after that, we have the constructor, which is doing the constructor based dependency injection for the logger service. And then here we have the get method that returns IEnumerable of weather forecast, that is the list of weather forecast, and whatever number we give over here, those many number of days, it is going to generate the weather forecast for. So right now it is just the simulation based on some basic logic. In reality, if you're looking for a weather forecast service, maybe you can integrate with the machine learning or artificial intelligence algorithms over here, which can work on some history data and generate the factual forecast. And that's what the default API is. Anyways, we are not going to be interested much in this. This is just to understand the overall structure, how the web API is created. So let's close this. And our requirement is to work with an API that talks to a backend SQL Server database, which I have already created over here. I'll just go to Server Explorer window. Again, if it is already not open, you can take it from view menu. I go to data connections, and here I have a database already created named as company DB. I just expand this. Tables, I expand, and here I already have a table called as departments. I just open the table definition here by right clicking. And you can see the design of this table says that I have 3 columns into this table, starting with department number, which is of type integer, also configured as identity column here. Then primary key also is created on this department number. And then we have the next column as department name of type varchar, length 50, not null, and then location in varchar 50, which is nullable. So pretty simple design, and I have some sample data also in this table. Let's have a look at that as well. So I just right click and say show table data, where I can see some sample data is already visible. Now I want to create an API which does all the CRUD operations on this table for me. And for that, I'm going to follow the MVC pattern to create my API. Hence, I just right click on this project and select add, and then select class. In fact, before that, it will be better if we create a new folder by the name models, and we create our model class inside this. That gives some structure to our project. Right click models and say add and select class. Here I name this class as department DPT. The class gets created. Here I import a couple of namespaces to do the mapping of this particular object department with my backend database table, that is departments, as we are going to use Entity Framework core over here to provide all the database operations at the API level. So here we go and say using system.componentModel.data annotations, followed by using system.componentModel.data annotations.schema. And then I use a mapping attribute over here named as table for the class. And here I need to give the table name, which I have used in the database in the backend, so that the table department gets mapped to my object department. And then I create the properties that will be mapped to the columns. So the names I'm going to keep the same so that I don't need to do the explicit mapping over here. This is my first property, public int department number. Then I go for the next property of type string that represents the equivalent of varchar by the name dname, which is my second column in the table. And then I go for the third property of type string again with the name as location. And then I need to do some metadata mapping over here. In the backend, department number column is primary key. So I want to say that this department number property of this department class also is representing key, so that by default, the validation gets placed in my application that automatically checks that the duplicate entry is not allowed. I want this department number to be nullable in type, because for department number in the backend, we have mapped identity definition for the column. That means the numbers are going to be automatically generated whenever the new record is getting created. Hence, my UI, while creating the new record, can avoid sending the value for the department number. Hence, that may come null. And hence, I'm looking for department number field to be defined as null. Then dname, by default in the database, has got the maximum length configuration of 50 characters. And that's what I want to be taken care of by the application at application level as well. So I say max length attribute is used for that. And I make it 50. And I put required attribute also because dname is explicitly configured as not null. And then location also is max length of 50. So this corresponds to the design that we have for the table in the backend. Once again, have a look at that. I'll just open the table definition. You can see department number is primary key and integer. Department number is key and integer. Then dname is nvarchar 50, that is Unicode characters 50 variable length. So that is represented by string in .NET. Hence we have string dname, but with max length 50. And why required? Because here it is not null. And then we have location as nvarchar 50, which can be null. So we have just put location as string with max length 50, and no required attribute has been used. So this is enough to do the mapping. Let's save. Let's close this file. Let's close this designer also. And then here I add another folder to my project by the name DAL for data access layer, which I'm going to create with the help of entity framework. So let's right click DAL and select add, select class. Let's name this as company DB context. And click add. The class gets created here. Before we move forward with the code for this class, there are a few things we need to do. First, let's go to Solution Explorer and open app settings.json. This is the configuration system in .NET Core. In .NET Framework, the configuration system is represented by XML files, app config or web config, depending on type of application that you are creating. But in .NET Core, it is all JSON configuration in place. So I come here and define a section named as connection strings with the value as another JSON object. So I put curly braces pair, and here I say the name for my connection string configuration is company DB CS for company DB connection string as the key, and then the value goes in as the typical SQL Server connection string. I'll say server equals to my server is local DB double backslash MS SQL local DB. That's the instance of SQL Server I'm using. Then the database I'll configure as company DB. There's the same database we saw in Server Explorer. And then I put integrated security equal to true, as I'm going to use Windows authentication for login to SQL Server. Let's save this. This name we will require, so I just get this copied. Next, I need to install the entity framework core inside my project, as .NET Core doesn't come up with all the features of the framework loaded by default into the context. All the features are there, most of the features are there, but they have put most of those features into the different NuGet packages to make the entire footprint of your application as small as it is possible, and let the application decide what all modules and features need to be loaded as per the requirement of the application and what all need not be loaded. Hence, the entity framework core also moves into a different NuGet package. And here we go to Package Manager console. If it is not open already, we can take it from Tools, NuGet Package Manager console. And here, let's issue the command as install-package Microsoft dot entity framework core dot SQL Server, as I'm going to use SQL Server backend. this will by default install another package that is Microsoft.Entity Framework Core and any other package that has got a dependency within SQL Server. Press enter and your package along with its dependencies gets added. Next thing we need to do is import a couple of namespaces here. One that represents your Entity Framework Core package. So here we say Microsoft.Entity Framework Core, followed by your model class namespace. So that is using DNC demo web API dot models, and then make this class inherit from the base class named as DB context, which comes from Microsoft.Entity Framework Core. Let's define a property here of type DB set, of type department, which is your model class, by the name departments, which is actually a collection now. And this collection basically represents all the records from the department table via the object to relational mapping represented by Entity Framework. Then for the configuration part, I need a constructor for this class. The configuration automatically is taken care of by the framework. So I just need to hand over the call to my base class DB context here by using the keyword base. This way, default constructor is configured. I would need a parameterized constructor as well that accepts a single parameter of type DB context options. Let's name this as options and change this constructor also to the parameterized constructor of the base class, which is taking in the same type of parameter. So I just pass options there and my DAL class is ready. All the CRUD operations are pre-coded inside our base class DB context. We don't need to code it at all. Let's save and let's build once. So build and build solution. You see all the implementation is going well. It says build succeeded, so all good. Next thing that we need to do is open startup.cs file from Solution Explorer and then do some configuration here, for which again we need to import a couple of namespaces here. First is Microsoft.Entity Framework Core, followed by some configuration here in configure services, where we have a IOC container represented by iService collection object, within which we need to register our application DB context class that we have created by the name company DB context. So for that, we'll use this services object dot add DB context method. It's a generic method to which I need to pass the class that I have created as the inherited member of DB context. So in our case, it is company DB context method. So put parenthesis. This method is accepting a parameter of type action, which is a delegate in .NET, built-in delegate. And this delegate depends on a reference of a method that takes in a parameter of type DB context options builder. So these days, most likely we use lambda expressions for passing the delegate values, especially when it is about the configuration and all. And hence I'm going to use lambda expression here. So I assume there is a parameter named as options, which is automatically going to be inferred as DB context option builder that goes in options dot use SQL Server, that is for communicating with SQL Server in the backend. And now if you see use SQL Server is asking for a connection string. I can hardcode the connection string. That is one of the way, but the better idea is to read it from the config file, and we have already put a connection string in the config file. So hence we will be reading from there. And for that, we'll take the help from this configuration API already injected with this property named as configuration. So here I say configuration dot, it gives me a method called as get connection string, directly reads the connection string section, and to which I need to pass the key of the connection string, which we already copied in clipboard by the name company DBCS. We have that connection string configured. So it will load the connection string and will pass to you SQL Server, which ultimately will be configured as the backend for the company DB context. This can be replaced with any service that you want to use depending on which backend you are going to connect to. So it could be SQL Server, it could be in-memory database, it could be PostgreSQL, it could be MySQL, whichever provider you have installed and you want to work with. So let's save this and once again build. You see all well, build succeeded, message comes up, that means it's all well. And the next thing that I'm going to do here is right click the controllers folder to create the controller now and select add and select controller. Herein, as we are looking to create an API controller with the backend configured with the help of Entity Framework, we have the obvious choice over here. The last template that we have API controller with actions using Entity Framework is what we will select and select add. Asking for model class here. Department is our model class. Let's select that. Data context is company DB context. Let's select that. Controller name by default is taken as the department's controller. I want to differentiate it with other MVC controllers which may exist in my application. Hence, I put department's API controller as the suffix over there. And let's click on add. This will initiate the scaffolding process. What that means is it will automatically read the backend based on the data context class that we have given and will generate the basic implementation of web API by default for me. Kind of boilerplate code gets generated over here for your API. And then as per the application's requirement, you can refactor. You can bring in the repository layer. You can bring in the business logic layer, and the communication will be your API talking to business layer, which in turn talks to repository to get the data operated on, and then repository talks to your data access layer represented by company DB context class. As of now, the scaffolding has resulted in API talking to company DB context class directly, but it is just a matter of refactoring later on. At least we have some working code over here now. So you can see there is a controller now, department's controller, marked as API controller, and the route template already coming in as API/controller, and company DB context variable being defined as the member of the class for which we are using dependency injection. As we have configured the DB context already here with the IOC container, we are retrieving or searching for that dependency within the IOC container and assigning it back over here. So this is the statement for the same. We're using constructor-based dependency injection. And then we have some methods that represents our RESTful web methods. Starting with get department that returns IEnumerable of department, which means the collection. All records will be returned here. Get department is returning single department object based on the ID passed to it. So we are having the logic to find that ID, find that department by the ID. If it is null, we are returning the HTTP status code not found, so that user comes to know this record is not available. If not, in that case, we return the department object, which is found. Then we have put department for edit operation, which takes in the old ID, that is department number, and the modified department object. And as per the industry standard, here we have put a check, which by default makes sure that the old ID and department number should be same. If it is not, return the bad request. HTTP status code. Okay, so that is going to be HTTP status code 400. Now, why this is so? Because these days, most of the application requirement says that once the primary key object is set, that value should never be changed. If the application requires other way around, probably then you can avoid having this parameter directly with department object itself. You can play with, and you can avoid using this statement as well in place. It all depends on application's need. And then if all goes well, we are setting the state of that current object coming in as modified into the collection. And then we say save changes, which actually makes a synchronization with the backend database. And while updating, it is quite possible that two users are simultaneously working on the same record. One possibility is where the user might have, some other user might have already deleted that record. So if it is deleted, we have to return not found status. If it is not deleted, but the other user has already modified the value, we want the concurrency exception to be thrown, which has to be handled at the application level. And because here we don't have anything to be returned back to the client, we just say return no content otherwise. This is post department, which is handling the create or insert operation, just taking in the parameter of type department, adding that to collection and calling save changes to synchronize with database. It's a new record, so the concurrency issues will never surface. And we are returning the path of where this record has been created so that the ID which is auto-generated, I mean department number which is auto-generated will also be returned back to the client. And then we have the delete operation that takes an ID, that is department number, finds it, checks if it is null, straight away it makes the user aware of that. The record is not present to delete. And if it is present, we actually get it removed from the collection first, and then save changes, synchronizes the delete operation with the database, and we return the deleted object back to the client. In case if client wants to give the prompt to the user that this is the record which was deleted, if you want to restore, you can go for one-click restore from there. As the object is already there, that same object can be passed back to create operation, I mean post department operation, and it can once again be added back into the database. And this is a helper method that is being used in put department over here. Just checking for the existence of the department by the given ID. So this is our web API almost ready. Time to test it. Before that, we will make some changes in one configuration file under properties. We have launch settings.json. By default, it has been configured to launch the URL for the weather forecast service, which is automatically created as a sample. I want to replace that with API/departments API, which is my web API path. And this is going to be used in case if I'm hosting my application on IIS Express, right? Default configuration says so. Or else I can actually make a selection over here for the project, which makes it a self-hosted environment. So in case if it is launched on self-hosted environment, there also I want the launch URL by default used to be this API departments API. Save this, close this tab, and press Ctrl F5 key combination on your keyboard. To launch the application, see the URL. By default, it comes to API/departments API because of the last change we have made in launch settings. And you can see the data is also coming in over here in the JSON format. I cannot test the post, put, and delete operations here in the browser, but I can test the other get operation, which is searching for a department number by ID. Let's say I'm looking for department number 2. I just put /2 there, and it by default shows me the single record for department number 2. Now, in order to test the post, put, and delete operations, either you have to use the tools like Postman or Fiddler or Firebug, or else we can actually make use of the open API specification. And with the help of that, we can generate some UI for testing functionally this API into the browser itself. Okay, so let's close this and let's see how do we create the open API specification for the web APIs that exist in our current application. So for that, what we need to do is, first of all, we need to install another NuGet package over here. So I go to Package Manager console. I just clear the screen for better visibility. And there I install a package named as swashbuckle.aspnet core. So here we go and put the command as install hyphen package. The name of the package goes here. So I say swashbuckle dot ASP.NET Core and press enter. The swashbuckle package gets added. The next thing we need to do is go to the startup.cs file. In fact, now we can close this departments API controller. In startup class, in configure services method, just after add controllers, now we need to put a call to a method add swaggergen on services, which is actually going to register another service for our IOC container. And for that, we need to import a namespace over here, first of all. That is Microsoft dot OpenAPI models. That's first, and then Microsoft dot swashbuckle dot ASP.NET Core dot swagger, and then let's move over here. After add controller, we'll say services dot add swagger gen. That stands for add swagger generator, which by default creates a open API specification documentation when used at the path as the base address of your website /swagger/v1/swagger.json. Okay, but by default it doesn't work. We need to get this service utilized somewhere, for which we will go to the configure method. Towards the end, we'll be adding some middleware components here by the name. In fact, it should be the first one to be configured here. So I'll say app.useSwagger. That gets my Swagger service utilized, and that is with the help of the Swagger middleware, which we have just added here by calling use Swagger method of app, which is of iApplication builder type. Let's save this. Once again, press Ctrl F5 key combination. That should launch your browser, showing the result from the get department API method. And then I just go to the base address by removing API/departments API and put the path that we just spoke about. That is swagger/v1/swagger.json, and press enter. And here comes the nice JSON documentation that represents the open API standards-based specification for your web API that you have just created. And what this specification contains is some details about your API, like some information, what is the name, what is the version, and then what are the usable paths where the request can come in, what all operations are allowed, like get or post or put or delete, and then therein also the mention of what kind of input is taken by that operation and what type of output is generated by that operation. So we have some reference of the schemas over here. If you scroll down towards the end, you will see some schemas are also mentioned here. There are two model objects that our web APIs are using. One is the sample web API weather forecast, and the other one is department that we have created. So department web API is using the schema based on department, and the overall schema goes here. Weather forecast is another schema object which is used by the sample web API weather forecast. So here goes the schema for the same. Looks nice. Now, the point is JSON documentation looks little complicated to understand. Even if we know JSON, still it is going to take some time to understand this format. And at the same time, as of now, it may be looking little simpler because we have just two web APIs with one web API having just one operation into it, and our own web API having just 5 operations into it. And that's why it looks pretty simple. Also, the schema is not very complex, just 3 to 4 fields we are using per model. In real-time applications, you will have very complex models, and your web APIs will be very complex as well, with lots of operations included into those web APIs. Hence, this documentation is going to look very, very complex. And that's where we want some kind of tool which reads this specification and represents all this specification as nice GUI. For that, we'll again close the browser, move back to Visual Studio, and implement another middleware component just after this useSwagger by the name useSwagger UI. So it's an extension to the previous one. If you don't have included this useSwagger, in that case, useSwagger UI won't do anything. It has a dependency. And useSwagger UI has to be configured after useSwagger only. This useSwagger UI also comes in with a parameter of type action, which is again the same delegate that depends on a method reference that takes in a parameter of type Swagger UI options. Here, I'm going to use that options as parameter that goes in multi-line statements I'm going to need. So I put curly braces, and here I say options dot Swagger endpoint. This middleware is going to consume the JSON specification from here and generate UI for me. So that is done by this Swagger endpoint. And here I need to pass the path where that JSON documentation is available. So base address is automatically taken. I just need to pass the relative path. So /swagger/v1/swagger.json is what we put into the browser to get to that document, and followed by the name for this web API. So this web API doesn't mean department or weather forecast. It is actually going to represent all the APIs that belongs to my project. So I'll give a collective name. Maybe I can call this as OI APIs. OI stands for Optimistic Infosystems, my company name, and the API is hosted by me. Let's save. Let's press Ctrl F5 key combination again. And let's go to the base address first of all. Base address should not display me anything because there is nothing to render. I rather go for Swagger/v1/swagger.json. This is still the same. What change we have brought in? Change is there, but not at this path because we are reading the direct JSON file. What we have to do is we have to put our request only till here, till /swagger. And now let's see. A nice UI comes up, which provides me some playground for testing the web APIs. Let's say I want to test weather forecast first. So I click on try it out and click execute. The result comes up over here. The weather forecast data is generated for 7 days. Then I'm done with this. Let's say I want to test this department's API. I click on get, try it out, execute, and I get the results of all the data which is already present. I collapse this and click on this get. I'm looking for the department with department number 2. So I say try it out. I pass department number 2 here and click on execute. And I get that department record over here. Then I collapse this. I want to create a new department record. So I click on post, click on try it out, giving me the schema of the record that needs to be given as request body. Department number I'll keep 0 because that is anyways auto-generated. And dname I'll give as, let's say, marketing, and location as Mumbai. I click on execute. Oh yeah, so I need to get rid of this impact. Click on execute and it's done. Because identity column doesn't allow me to give any explicit value for that particular field. Right, so here I say execute and it gets generated. I have the new data represented by department number 1015. I just get this copied. And let's click on get once again here. I'm looking for 1015 that is recently created. I click on execute, it shows me that. Then I collapse this and I click on put to test edit operation. I click on try it out. I replace this demo schema with what I copied. The ID I need to give over here as exactly the same value over here. I want to change the location from Mumbai to Pune. I do that and click on execute. I get all successful stuff. And to verify that, I collapse put and once again go back to get. I already have the parameter 1015 in place. I just click on execute once again, and I see the updated value here for the location. And then I go to delete, try it out, put 1015. That's the record I want to delete. I just click on execute. It got deleted. The sample is already here as we are returning the object that is being deleted. And then to verify this, once again, I go back to get here, say execute, and it says not found. That means the record is actually deleted. And to verify it further, we can go to get, execute here, and we don't have 1015 department number. Right, so that basically ends our part 1 of the session, where we saw how do we create a web API using ASP.NET MVC Core 3.1 with the help of entity framework to talk to the database for providing CRUD operations. And then we saw how to create the open API specification documentation for the API with the help of the Swagger framework. The Swagger framework can be implemented by using Swashbuckle framework or NSwag. There are other packages also available that provide Swagger implementation. So it all depends on your personal choice, depending on in which particular framework you have got experience in, and otherwise which framework your company prefers. So based on that, you decide which framework needs to be used for Swagger. The ultimate framework is Swagger, but the implementation of Swagger is done by some NuGet package representing the framework, the master framework for Swagger. So depends. I've used Swashbuckle, you may use NSwag or something else. Point is, we at the end require open API specification to be generated, and if possible, the UI also to be generated for the same, and with the help of which we have tested the API. So let's move on to part number 2 of this session, where we are looking to consume this recently created web API into an Angular 10 based user interface. So typically the HTML pages we are going to have driven by some CSS and JavaScript, and maybe if we are using Angular 10, some TypeScript as well. Ultimately, TypeScript gets compiled as JavaScript only. So let's see how do we set up this application and how do we work with it. This application needs to be kept running. So I'll just keep it as it is. And just one simple thing I do here is I right click this project in Solution Explorer and say open folder in File Explorer. And here I want to launch the command prompt. So I just type CMD in the address bar of the Windows Explorer, opens the command prompt. So what I did is this folder got opened when I right clicked and said open folder in File Explorer. And here I typed CMD and pressed enter. So that automatically created the instance of command line. Now, here, before you proceed, first of all, you need to see whether Node.js is installed or not. And you can go to Node.js official website, nodejs.org, and download the latest version of Node.js and install it. LTS version you have to install. And then once the installation is completed, you can just issue the command node-v to see what version you have. And then you have to update your NPM version, Node Package Manager, just like NuGet we have for .NET. For JavaScript, we have Node Package Manager. The same command npm-v gives me the NPM version. That's the latest version again. If it is not, then you can just say npm install npm, and that upgrades your npm version. So you have all the documentation available on nodejs.org. Then you need to install the Angular CLI tools to work with Angular projects. So for that, the command that we are going to issue is npm install -j. I want to install it globally. That means for all the users on this machine. And then the name of the package that I want to install here representing Angular CLI. So I put the name as @Angular/CLI. That will install a latest Angular CLI. If already installed, it will just ignore that. If old version installed, it will upgrade that and get the latest Angular CLI available for me. You can see it has installed Angular 10.2.3. In fact, it says that, okay, it is asking about some privacy policy. I'll just say yes for the successful installation, and that's it. So Angular CLI got installed. I'll say clear screen, CLS. And then I want to create a new Angular project at this location here for consuming that web API. So here I say ng space new. ng command will work after installing Angular CLI. And then the name of the project that we want to create, representing the front end application based on Angular. So I'll say department front end -ng app. ng app I am suffixing just to understand that it's a Angular application. Press enter. Asking about whether you would like to add the Angular routing or not. So for our current requirement, I'm not going to use Angular routing, but in future, if we modify the application, we may need. So I'll just say yes. If you are never going to use that Angular routing, in that case, you can ignore that as well by saying no. Then it is asking which style sheet format would you like to use. There are several options these days. Standard CSS can be used, or you can use the more advanced version of CSS by the name SCSS or SASS or less, and then you have stylus as well. So I'm going with CSS because I'm having more experience with that. Selection is just done with the help of the up and down arrow keys. That green highlighted stuff is your selection, and just press enter after that. So it will get everything set up. Meanwhile, we need some changes in our startup.cs file as well to allow the application hosted on a different domain communicating with this web API. So basically, there is a policy called as cross-origin resource sharing by default set for your web APIs, which blocks any request coming from any other domain other than where the web API itself is hosted. So your web API right now is hosted on this localhost colon 44389, and our application is going to be hosted on a different port, so that becomes a different domain, and that communication will be blocked by default. I want to make that open, and I'm not sure what port number will be there, so I just want to make sure that the request coming from any domain, any port number should be respected and solved, and hence my configuration that is required is put into the startup.cs file in configure method. We are going to do that just after this, just before the use HTTPS redirection statement. We'll put app.use course. That's the middleware by default available. Use course method takes in a parameter that is of type action. The third overload basically takes that, and just like what we did earlier, I'll say this is named as, see, the parameter type is course policy builder, so maybe I can name this as builder. Goes in builder dot allow any header. Any HTTP header can come in as the request. Dot allow any method, which means any HTTP request type, get, put, post, delete is allowed. And then the most important thing, allow any origin. It says that open this particular web API to receive the request from any domain for any HTTP request method and with any headers. If we'll be able to test this once the front end is available. You can just say Control F5 so that the changes are accommodated and service is restarted. As we have made some changes into the code. And here in the browser, it launches in another tab. The API is successfully working. We can check the Swagger also. Great. Now this project doesn't contain anything other than APIs. So why I am being forced to put this Swagger explicitly? Can't I get this Swagger UI directly at the base URL? Let's see. We can do that also. And for that, we'll once again go back to startup class and locate where we have configured the Swagger UI. Here it is. Along with the Swagger endpoint, using options, we'll call another method. In fact, there is another property by the name route prefix that we will set to string.empty. So in this case, now if I build again and execute this, at the base URL itself, I'll be able to see the Swagger UI. let's say Control F5. This is working, and now if I refresh over here, directly at the base address itself, I'm getting the Swagger UI. I can test one of that. So try it out, execute, and I'm still able to get the data. So other methods are also going to work. Okay, so let's keep this as it is. My application is still running. In fact, we are never going to come back to this Visual Studio instance. Our server side development is finished completely. So let's move back to the console and see if my front-end application is created. Yes, it is. The command has completed successfully. You can ignore this warning, which says Git is not recognized, because simply my machine doesn't have Git installed. If it is installed, it will be able to recognize that. So we can ignore that. And then we go to Visual Studio Core, VS Code. That's a lightweight version of Visual Studio from Microsoft for client-side web application development mainly. I'll just close this welcome page and go to File and say select Open Folder. Our folder is on D drive, demos. In DNC Demo Web API, DNC Demo Web API, and this is the folder, Department Frontend NG App. I will do the client-side development here in this VS Code. Okay, so my file structure is already open. Any Node packages or Angular packages that you are going to use will be recorded in packages.json. And here is the list of all the packages that we have under dependencies. Okay, and our code files basically go to source, where we have some TS files, which is TypeScript file. Some sample is already generated over here, which we would like to see what it has generated, what it has created, and index.html representing the home page of this application. And before I launch the application, I want to do some integration with the Bootstrap CSS framework to make it look nice. And for that, I have a couple of dependencies for Bootstrap that I need to install first of all. So for that reason, I just go here and use npm command, npm install or npm I, what and the same thing. I'm looking for jQuery. The minimum version required by Bootstrap is 1.9.1. You can have higher version, jQuery 3 also installed, latest version also installed, no problem. Minimum is this. So as of now, I'm just installing the minimum version. -- save will make sure that the copy is saved at the project level. So press enter. And then there is another dependency that we need to install before installing the Bootstrap. So npm install. The other dependency is on popper.js. Bootstrap uses these two dependencies behind scenes. And here I'll say any version higher or equal to 1.16.0 is required. So that caret symbol says that this one or higher version, if available, can be used. I'll say -- save to get it saved as a copy into my project. And then I say install Bootstrap. So I say npm I Bootstrap -- save. And my Bootstrap also gets added. Okay, so again, if I go to Visual Studio, under assets, under app, okay, It's actually under node modules. It's here, node modules. I can see there must be an entry for Bootstrap now. It's a long list. We need to search for that. We can do it later. Okay, so the point is the Bootstrap framework has got added, and I want to see what sample has been generated for me. So I can say npm start or npm serve, ng serve in fact, which will start the Angular CLI server. Oh yeah. My bad. Here I did a mistake, I believe. That's why I'm not able to see the Bootstrap things. No issues. I'll just go back to the folder of our project, and here we can see node modules is generated outside the front-end app. I'll just get that deleted. Here what we are supposed to do is cd front-end front-end ng app. This is where all of our stuff is there. And this is where we are now going to install those three packages. So starting with jQuery. Done. Next is Popper. Once Popper is done, we'll install Bootstrap again. Done. Now let's say ng serve to start the Angular CLI server where our application will be hosted. Okay, some confirmation about privacy policy from Google. I'll say okay. So what this command basically does is starts the Angular CLI server, compiles all of your Angular implementation, and then starts the endpoint on the Angular CLI server for your application, which later on it displays at the end once this command is complete. Okay, so here it shows me my endpoint for the front-end app. I just select this, right click, which copies it automatically. Go to the browser. In another tab, I just paste that URL and press enter. And here I get the nice UI, which is generated as a sample for me by default. In fact, the good part about it is I've got all the important links also to understand how do I learn Angular. So I have CLI documentation, I have Angular tutorial, the blog, and then how very specific tutorials for how do I create new components and add different features and uh, work with it. So let's keep this as it is, minimize the browser, and I'll keep the server also running. The good part about the Angular CLI server is you don't need to restart the server for after making any changes to your code. This automatically detects the changes, compiles the changed implementation, and refreshes the browser automatically. So that's great. But I need to run some commands, in fact, before I proceed forward. So for now, I'm just shutting down the server. Control C and press yes. Here I need to issue one command which creates my next component wherein I'm going to write my code that actually communicates with my backend web API. So that is something what we call as services in Angular. And let's go for the command. Make sure you are in the front-end project directory. And here I'll go for ng. I want to install it globally. There is a service component I want to install. So I say S and then the name of the service that I want to create. So I want to name it as service only. It can be anything though. It can be department service or something. But now I'm just keeping it service. Press enter. There are a couple of files which are added to our project now. Service.service.spec.ts and service.service.ts, where our work is going to be into this file, service.service.ts, which will communicate with our backend service. Now here I can once again say start the server by saying ng ser, which will start the host. We'll wait for this to be started up and we'll check into the browser that the endpoint is available. Okay, so here I go to the browser and refresh. I'm able to see the UI, that means all well. I'll refresh this API also. So Agar UI is also visible, so API is also up and running. Switch to this and just minimize the browser. Keep this console also running. Minimize this and back into Visual Studio Code. Let's open that newly added file here, which will be there in src folder, in app folder, by the name service.service.ts. We can see some code. There is some import statement on the top. So this is one of the library from which we are importing one of the component that is injectable. And with the help of that, we have some configuration going in here, provided in root. And then there is a class service with the default constructor automatically created here and being exported. Being exported means across different TypeScript and JavaScript files, this class will be visible and available for use. Okay, so we are going to have some of our own implementation here now. So first of all, we need to have some import statement on the top. Just like namespaces in C#, we have modules being imported here. Put import curly braces from library named as @angular /common /http, as I'm looking to have the backend communication with the web service based on HTTP protocol. So HTTP is what we need. And here the classes that we are looking to import from this library are the first one being HTTP client, comma, the second one being HTTP headers. Then we don't modify this injectable thing, keep it as it is. We have class service, wherein before the constructor, I'm going to define a variable which is private read only. Many C# style syntaxes you will find over here, as we are not coding in JavaScript, we are coding in TypeScript, which will eventually be converted to JavaScript before running. You see API URL. I will call this colon string, which says that it is of type string, equals to TypeScript is a strongly typed language, right? So that's why we can specify the data types here. And here I need to give the base URL of my web API. So I can go back to the browser, Swagger UI, and just the base URL I'll copy from here, which is https://localhost:443889 for me. So slash I'll copy. So it's back to Angular UI, and then minimize and come back over here and paste. So this is my web API URI. Constructor I'm going to modify a bit, where I'm going to have a private declaration for the parameter HTTP that actually is of type HTTP client. This is something like proxy for the web API that I would be creating. And then here we have another member of the class defined with the name HTTP options. That is actually a JSON object having headers property into it that is configured to an instance of new HTTP headers. The constructor also takes in a parameter. Here, if you see, it's asking for the headers set as JSON object. So we'll put curly braces. And my first header goes over here with the name as content type. For post and put request, basically we will need this. The input that we are going to send to the backend is going to be in the form of JSON object. So we say the content type is application/JSON. And then we need to create some member methods over here, which will be doing the communication with the backend service. So my first method is get data. And here we have a single return statement which says this dot HTTP, where it represents HTTP that we have created here, which is of type HTTP client. I said it's the proxy for communicating with your backend service. This HTTP object gives me some methods like get, post, put, delete. Straight away, I'll use get here. I need to pass in the URI of my web API where the request needs to go. So it all starts with this dot API URI that we have defined on the top as read-only variable. But that's not sufficient. I have further things to be added there. API slash departments API. So I put a concatenation like this, wherein I say this dot API URI plus API slash departments API. And that's the default get method that will be called. Okay, and the JSON document that is obtained from this will be returned by this get data method. Same way, here I go for post data member method that takes in a parameter form data that represents the data collected from the UI, and that data needs to be posted to the web API. And this API also returns something. So I say return this dot HTTP dot post this dot API URI the same way. This time also I need to concatenate to slash departments API. Without parameter, comma, I need to pass the body object as well. You can see in the parameters it is asking for body. So I would say it's form data object, the JSON object that we are receiving. So that is post data. You just copy this post data method, paste it here, rename this to put data, as this is going to be quite similar. Fact is, it is going to have the old department number being passed as ID, and then the new modified department object in form data. Then I say this dot return this dot HTTP dot put. Initial part is going to be same, this dot API URI plus API slash departments API, and one more concatenation will go in here. That is, the ID also needs to be mapped, and here there will be one slash, and then followed by form data. So this is put, and finally we have the last member method over here that does delete operation for us. So I'll say delete data. You can rename this as get department, post department, put department, delete department as well. Up to us what names we want to use. I'll say ID is taken in as parameter for the department which needs to be deleted. And then this also says return this dot HTTP dot delete this dot API URI plus API slash departments API slash this requires ID to be passed, so I'll say plus ID. And no form data needs to be passed to this because this is just the delete requirement. Let's save this and then open an existing file named as app.module.ts. Here we need to make some changes. This is basically representing your app startup. And this is where you need to enable some features which our application is going to use. So browser module already added, ng module already added, app component already added, routing module already added, which right now we are not going to use, but anyways, it's already added. And then the next thing that we want is some features from Angular Forms that allows me to work with the form data. So I put curly braces, empty pair initially, and complete the statement by saying from and the target library from where I want to import. So I say at Angular -forms is the module. And from that, the actual modules that I'm looking for include forms module and there is another one, reactive forms module, an extension of forms module, in fact. Then the next import statement that takes something from another package named as Angular/common/HTTP that represents HTTP services. So we'll say Angular/common/HTTP, and the module that I'm looking for is HTTP client. So I say HTTP client module. If I don't do this, HTTP client class will not work for me. And then I say import my own service from I need to get my local path, so I'll say dot current directory, that is /service.service, and let's name this as either a department service or whatever name you give over here will be used. I call this as service. In fact, it's not whatever name. It all depends on by what name the class has been created here. It's service. So here also I say service. If this was named as department service, I could have put department service here. Okay, then declaration is all okay. Under imports, we have browser module, app routing module. I want forms module also. We imported. This is global imports basically. Then I want reactive module, reactive forms module, and followed by HTTP client module. Right? Forms module, reactive module, and HTTP client module. And my service will be going in providers. So here I say provider is service, Bootstrap is app component, and export class app module. So this is done. Now, what I want is the Bootstrap to be integrated as the main style sheet provider for my current front-end project, for which we already have a file named as style.css over here. Right now, it's not referring to any other CSS. I just delete the comment and put one import statement here that makes it talk to an existing CSS file represented by Bootstrap. So here, if I see node modules has got Bootstrap, this time it should be there. Yes, it is. Under Bootstrap, I have got dist folder under which I have CSS, under which I have the minified version of Bootstrap CSS by the name bootstrap.min.css. So relative part to this I need to pass, and for that I say tilde bootstrap. Tilde bootstrap will be automatically searched in node modules. So bootstrap folder. Under that, we want to search the folder dist/css, and the file that we want there from there is bootstrap.min.css, and we are through to this. We have mapped this. Save, and then open another file from your app src folder named as app.components.ts. So first import is okay. I want a couple of more imports here. First one is going to be my own service. So I just say empty curly braces from dot slash service dot service, and hence the class that I want to import from that package is service. That's the only one available as of now. And then I'm looking to import from Angular Forms. So I'll say from at Angular slash forms. Dot slash is for local stuff and at is for global stuff. There are a couple of modules, in fact, 3 modules I'm looking for. First one being form group. Second that I'm going to use is form control. The third one that I'm going to use is validators from Angular Forms. Moving on to component, here we are not going to do any modification. The selector is app root. The template URL is app component HTML. So basically app root is configured in your index.html. This is what the selector is. And it will automatically link to that and will do the injection, the UI injection into that. Template URL to be used is this app.component.html, which is here. So whatever we code over here will be injected. In fact, the default stuff I am going to delete and save. After that, if I refresh, in fact, browser automatically gets refreshed as I told you earlier. The component is completely clear now. None of the sample stuff is there. If you want, you can retain something out of it, but most likely you may not want. You might want total custom UI created for your application's need. And then we have the CSS file also being configured, app.component.css, which is here. So if you're looking for any modification, instead of doing it in style.css or the Bootstrap CSS, you do it here, which is going to be specific for the component. Whereas style is common for all the HTML pages also, standard HTML pages also, which are going to be put into your website. Okay, so CSS I'm not going to touch, and I will be playing with these 2 files only now. So this component configuration is good. I already have a class named as app component being exported from here, where the title is already set to department frontend ng app. I'm good with that. And then I want to put my own implementation here. So I first of all go with constructor that takes in some parameter that will be associated privately with the class. So I say private instance of service. This is variable name and then the type name itself. So service. So I use this constructor only for dependency injection. Then I have a member named as data that can be anything. I can set it to department also, but for that I need to create the model class department. Then only I'll be able to set it. Then I have department form as the next member, which is of type form group. Then I have another member named as submitted. This is set to false. I can say this is of type bool. So colon bool will set it to Boolean type, and then equal to false will set it to false. Should be Boolean. Okay. And then I have another member, let's say event value, that is also going to be of type any, and default value I'm giving to it as same. This I'm going to use for toggling between the text for update and save operation. For insert operation, the title of my button should be save, and for edit operation, the title of the button should be update. Hence, the toggle is required. Same button I'm going to use for both because we are going to create a single page application, and that's why I'm using this event value. Then I have my first method over here, which is basically the entry point for this component, named as ng on init. Name itself says it's the startup method or entry point method. And this is basically represented by a void JavaScript or TypeScript function that doesn't take in any parameter, but there is some body which does something for me. Here what I'm having is this calls an helper method from this current class itself, that is get data. Not yet created, we'll be creating it shortly. Is there. Then we say set the department form data member, which is of type form group, to new instance of form group. And what this form group basically takes in is a JSON object that represents my data. So the mapping of my data members with the controls basically needs to be done. And that's what I'm going to set up over here. So here we go and say department number colon new form control. By default, it should be taken as null for insert operation. Then dname colon. Just have a look at this. Names are same, but the casing is different. In C# backend, I'm using Pascal casing. Here I'm using camel casing because when we call the API, the result comes in JSON format, which uses a camel casing. We can confirm over here by Swagger UI. If I go to get and click try it out and execute, see here, the camel case data is coming back. Hence, I'm using camel casing there. Okay, so back to Visual Studio Code. I set the dname to new form control. The value is blank initially, and there are validators configured for it. So within square bracket, I say validators dot required. There can be more than one validations. That's why the array needs to be passed. As of now, we have just one validation, but still that needs to be passed as an array. There should be comma here, and so is comma required here as well. And finally, I have location that is set to new form control with the initial value as blank and having a validator required. I'm making location also required at the client side. So it's up to you. If you want it this way, you can go for it. Otherwise, that's fine. This is where ng init is finishing. Now we need to satisfy this get data method. We need to have this get data method created here. So create get data method, no parameters taken. And for payload, what this does is it interacts with our backend service via the service that we have created by the name service. So here I say this dot service dot get data, get data method from service is what we are calling here. And then we call the method subscribe on the results. To which we need to pass some parameter. If we see what it is asking is some observer or observable collection, and that I'll put as data any as an array of any. This is parameter and lambda expression going in, which does something for me. So I say lambda expression, curly braces, very much similar to what we do in C#. And I say this dot data is set here to the data that we are receiving from get data. So I say data, this dot data is equals to data. So what we receive from here goes to this parameter, and this parameter then gets mapped to the data member of our class app component, and then data binding will happen on this. So get data is done. Like get data, I'm going to need some more methods here, like delete data, save data, and update data. So the first one I'll create here is delete data. Let's say delete data is the next method. Takes in a parameter named as ID because it needs to know which item it needs to delete. Here also I see use the service that we have created by the name service. Call the delete data method of that service, pass ID to it, and subscribe to the result returned by it. So I say subscribe. Same thing what we did in the previous case. Here I'll say data any goes in this dot data equals data. As after deleting the data, what we want is our UI to refresh to show that the data is deleted from the UI as well, not only from backend. So here I call the get data method again to do the data binding from the scratch. Next, I'm looking for a method named as save data, whatever you call it. Here I say this dot submitted equals to true. Save method is called, that means the changes have been asked to be saved. So I say submitted equals to true. And then I do some basic validation here. So I say if this dot department form that we have defined earlier here as form group dot invalid. If any of the validation is failing, this invalid property for the entire form will be getting false. We just want to return without doing anything. If all well, then we want to interact with the backend service via the local service dot post data. We'll say the parameter is this dot department form dot value. So complete form data will be given as input, and then again we hook for the return value subscribe. Which is actually going to be the same thing. After adding also, what I want is it to refresh the information for me. So I copy this much of code and paste it here. So just one change here. Here I'll say this dot reset form, which is another helper method we are going to create shortly. This is to clear the form and set it back to the initial state. Then comes update method, which is going to be pretty much the same as save. So I copy save method, rename this to update. So it goes with the same thing, this dot submitted true, then do the validation. Then instead of post data here, it makes the call to put data. The first parameter which goes in over here is this dot department form dot value dot department number, as the ID needs to be passed first, comma this dot department form dot value, then followed by that same subscribe stuff where we are again saying this dot data equals to data and this dot reset form. So this is update method. Now there is another method. Let's say first of all create that reset form stuff. So reset form, it says this dot get data. As we are putting this get data call in reset form, here we are just calling reset form and save and update, not get data again. So it will do that. And here we say this dot department form itself to be reset. So it will automatically set to be cleared. The reset button functionality automatically will be carried out. Then I reset the event value. If and this dot submitted to false. Reset the state. And then one last method I'm going to need over here is to handle the edit request. When edit button is clicked, what to do? So I have there as one method that is named as edit data that takes in a complete object of department named as data. I can name this as department as well. Then I say this dot department form. Point is when I click on edit, the single record representation has to come up with the existing values already filled. Hence, I'm passing the entire object here to the edit data method, and with the help of this, I'll make sure the single UI will automatically preload the data that is being edited. And after making changes, user can directly click on update. Okay, so here we say department form dot controls represented by the name, department number. We want to set its value, so I call set value. What the data coming in dot department number. So department number. Data dot department number in fact. And the same thing for other three fields. Dname. This will be dname as well. This is location. This is also location. And one last thing, this dot event value if it is the update request coming in, the text of that button should be set as update. Otherwise, it should remain same. The state we are changing, and that's our UI controller, we can say. And now the last thing pending is the HTML code, which actually represents our form. So switch to app component HTML, which is here. That contains some sample stuff that we deleted and we saw in the browser it got cleared. So here now we need to create the UI. So for this, I'm going to put some ready to use stuff. The lengthy HTML I have here. And the class right now is not about learning HTML. So I just use the pre-created code. I'll just explain it quickly. Straightforward HTML I have. Div class container where I'm using some Bootstrap classes. Form group named as department form. This has to match with what we have used in the backend and app components. ng submit on submit. What I want is this event value to be set. And then we have the title, department stable CRUD operations demo, and then some UI creation. So what I'm looking for is on the top, there should be the single record representation where itself I can add more and more data. And that has got submit or save or update button, depending on in which state I am. And below that, I need to have a tabular representation of all the records of the department table. So the first part is all about the singular UI representation. So directly I have dname with input type hidden for form control name department number. While creating, I don't need department number. And even for editing, I don't need department number. I just need to hold the existing department number there. So I put a input type hidden, then input type text for dname. For validation stuff, I'm having some Angular conditions, ng if submitted, and after that form.controls dname.errors is actually having some errors. Set the class to text danger. At the same time, another if statement checking if department form.controls.dname errors not required is the error, display the error message as dname is required. If any other error, the default message will be displayed. For required, this is the message that will be displayed. Same UI for location also created here. And then here I have the button type submit, some Bootstrap classes being applied, and the event value being displayed. So save or update depending on the context. And then here you can see I'm having the tabular representation. So here goes all headers. Maybe I can replace this TD with TH. That will be good, as these are table headers. So ideally it should be TH. And the last two cells are basically the empty cells for holding the edit and delete button. And there goes the TR, where I'm using ng4, which represents the for each iterator in Angular. Let D of data. So this is just like for each loop in C#, for each D in data. So the D will represent the current record. And that's what the mapping is. TD, D dot department number, D dot name, D dot location. And then the fourth cell having edit data button, wherein we pass this D object directly. Edit data basically is the function that we are calling from app component, and we are passing the current object straight away. And based on which what this app component is doing here is setting up the values into the above controls and then some styling. And here goes the delete, where we are picking up department number and passing it to delete data method. This is where the mapping with the app component is happening. And that's it. So let's save and switch to the browser. We already have the nice UI created here. So I can see the existing data. I want to add a new record here. Let's say department name as marketing. I want to add location is Mumbai. I click on save. It gets added here. I want to edit this information. So when I click on edit, here the record is automatically loaded, and see the text of the button is changed to update. I just make the necessary changes and I click on update. It changes back to save, but at the same time here you can see the value is changed. And now I want to test the delete operation. So I just click on delete. It's gone. Even if I say refresh, the record is permanently gone. So this is our complete CRUD operation based on ASP.NET MVC Core 3.1 Web API, and that is consumed by Angular 10 based frontend. If you have any questions now, feel free to ask.
Do you upload the code this anywhere?
Yes, I will be uploading this to my OneDrive account, and the URL will be shared. You might have received some invite, right?
Yeah. And one more
So you can
question I have
just
like
you can just reply to that invite that I'm looking for the recording of this session or the demo of this session. My colleague Miss Preeti will share that with you.
okay, so can we have a little bit information about HTTP patch, that is the new
Yeah, so we have
new methodology?
actually we have some more sessions coming up where we will be discussing about those things as well.
Okay.
So we have broken down multiple sessions into, I mean, a big Angular training of say 24 to 32 hours into small 2 hours, 2 to 3 hour sessions, so that
Mhm.
everyone can attend based on their requirement. So we'll talk about it there.
Okay.
Yeah. Any more questions, guys? So just a moment, I'll share the feedback link for this session. It will hardly take 1 minute, not more than that. Please do fill the feedback. I hope you have enjoyed the session so far. Just locating the link for feedback, and I'll put that in chat box. Check if you have received it.